The Punisher, Episode 5, Gunner. Now, this episode, I would say, is probably one of my favorites so far of the season. I think this one was definitely cool because we get the reintroduction of Agent Orange, as he's basically named by Frank. They do say his name because he gets moved up to like a deputy director position or whatever, but I'm going to go with the Agent Orange thing, which is oddly appropriate with the timing. But yeah, this was definitely an awesome episode with Frank and Micro, especially towards the end. I thought it was really cool, just the way all the everything was just playing out there. But it was a really fun episode watching them kind of go through. We have Medina kind of going further into the case, knowing that Frank is alive, keeping that secret as well because she knows that everyone above her is just trying to keep her in tow as far as whatever this big secret is that she doesn't know. So I thought it was really cool watching her do that. The dude that's working with her, like I said, I want to say his name is Seth, but I really can't remember. So she ends up trusting him, and ultimately he does not rat her out. And it's like, no, we don't have any suspects. We don't know anything special that's going on. But of course, Medina's going through this case. She calls in Karen, who's like, all right, she had a connection with Frank Castle, and she's trying to get some information out of her. I love Karen going in there, and she already had all this extra information. It was like, does this have anything to do with the car accident, which is supposed to be your car based on the plates, but there's also no report, which is oddly suspicious. So I love the way Karen kind of went in there and she, like right from the beginning, she kind of flipped it right around because she already had a little bit of information. So I like the way that whole scene played out where they're doing their back and forth, getting some answers here and there from each other, really. So I definitely like that scene. And then Karen goes to Frank and it's like, yeah, I think she knows you're alive. And I thought that was pretty cool. They had this conversation, a pretty emotional moment as well, where Frank reveals one of his memories of when he, came back home and he sees that his son basically painted like this giant marine mural. And I thought that was a cool moment because we saw him when, it was him and his daughter on the boat, and he kind of had that freak out moment with his son where, like he grabbed his face and was like, don't you ever say stuff like that. And then we had another moment like that a little bit where he, he takes him on the back and he like basically lays him on the ground. He's like, I had my finger in his face and I said, what the hell were you thinking? And he said he looked at me like a little man and he said, bad guys are afraid of Marines, and when you're not here, I have to protect our girls. And I thought that was a great scene. And then, he gets super emotional about that where it was like, my family was better off without me, and so are you. Like, you've already been called in for questioning because this woman thinks that you might even, still be in contact with me. You need to back off. Like, you need to kind of get away from this situation because I don't want you to get killed too, because that's kind of just what happens around Frank Castle. So I thought that was a great moment, and Karen did great too. I wish I knew the actress's actual name, but she did a great job in that scene with how emotional it got. Where it was like we're everyone's kind of just fighting to not be alone, and you can't just give it all up. Like it sucks for sure. He lost his family, but you can't just give up every possible connection that you've made after that. Like that's just not how you should go about life. So I thought that was definitely a great moment, and as they're just continuing on through the episode, we have a couple more answers dropping here and there, and it's like, all right, well, who was the one that made the tape? And it ended up being Gunnar Henderson, I want to say was his full name. So it was Gunnar, and it's like, all right, so if he was the one that did it, then we need to find him because maybe he knows the real name of Agent Orange. And so we get to see that Agent Orange is still working at the CIA, and he's going through, like, his first sequence is him going through and he's saying, like, welcome to the CIA. And then the other scene was him getting, like, a medal, but he couldn't technically have the medal, which I thought was pretty funny. And it was just like, that's like the thing with the CIA, like in movies and stuff, is like the CIA is like at the top of secrecy within the government, where it's just like you don't know when it comes to the CIA. So I thought that was actually kind of funny. It was like, congratulations, tell nobody. So I thought it was kind of cool that they did that. But we see him throughout this episode a little bit, and as things are kind of going forward, he knows that with him moving into this new position, he's got some things he needs to deal with, which just so happens to coincide with Medina looking into this case, where it's like, oh, here's like 20 names. Gunnar happens to be one of them, and Gunnar clearly knew something because that's why he sent those people out there to kill him. He didn't know his name, but I imagine that means there has to have been something. He could have just been going through the list, and that was like the easiest person to kill first because Gunnar had been off the grid for such a long time. It would be like, well, if he died, literally no one would even know about it. So maybe that's why he started with him rather than, oh, let me kill this dude who's like a grief counselor to people with PTSD, that sort of deal. Although he's not a part of it. I keep forgetting that he wasn't actually there. He's just a main character. But, the same thing with Russo. Like, he was there, so is he going to try to kill him as well? Or, stuff like that. But I thought it was pretty cool, them going through, and then of course Frank and Micro were easily able to find it. It was like, hey, he has this plot of land, and that was pretty much where he was. And it was quite simple, and they found him. He hits Frank with, I think, one arrow. He tries to hit him with a second, and then Frank has to explain, like, hey, I wasn't a part of like the absolute disaster and all the really, really horrible stuff. They took out my family. Like, I am not a part of, trying to, silence anybody else. So it's like, oh, my bad. Sorry, I hit you with the arrow. And then we get to see, or well, we don't see it, but we get to hear why Gunner actually went through the process of filming. He basically was risking his life in that moment to film, what happened when they had that guy tied up. And he says it was because, this guy, like this kid, he said, it was like he gave me his knife when I lost mine, and then he ended up dying. So I wanted to kind of give him his knife back and sort of pay my respects. And I see people down there stuffing drugs into his body like he literally meant nothing, and they were doing that with multiple bodies. And that was the moment where he was like, yeah, I'm done with this. Like, I'm done following these orders, because it's not just taking out the bad guys now. Now it's taking out the bad guys, but the good guys don't really matter either. Like, their bodies are, just stuffed full of drugs and sent back home. And it's just like, wow, that totally explains why he would film that thing, even, kind of risking himself. And he talks about who was there. The Agent Orange was there, the guy who ran the mortuary, their captain was there. I thought for sure he was going to say that Russo was there, because I'm just waiting for that moment, like I mentioned before. I'm like waiting for that moment, like for why Frank and Russo end up, kind of his enemies, because I just assumed that's going to happen. I could be totally wrong. That's just how they definitely made his character seem in the trailer, where there's a scene where he's walking away from an explosion. That's bad. There's something bad that happened there, and like he's the one who set that explosion off. At least that's what I gathered from the trailer. So I was just kind of waiting for that revelation, and he didn't say it, and I was like, oh, I thought for sure he was going to say Russo was involved in it, and at some point he decided to get out of it, but he was involved in it up to a certain extent, and then he was kind of done. But that never came up. It was like, nope, at this point Russo is still, in my eyes, he's still kind of just clean. Like, he was a part of it. He's just as dirty as Frank was. But, like I said, it could have been Frank's fault that they end up, or it could be Frank's fault. If they're not enemies now, it could be, that they become enemies. Because Russo was the one who got out of it before Frank even did. So there's just like a million questions as to how in the world does Russo end up becoming like a legitimate bad guy in the show. That question is like so up in the air for me. But it was a great sequence, and I was like, oh, that's a cool revelation. I thought there's gonna be another one with Russo there, but it's just he tells the story of why he decided to film it, and kind of get that information out there, because he realized exactly how dark it got and how expendable and disrespected they were, alive or dead. So that was definitely a great moment. And then unfortunately, Chopper comes in, and then there's just a little squad that's coming after him, and it's a pretty decent action sequence. I actually like the way it played out, where they're outgunned and outnumbered, and Frank and Gunner just have to survive. And Micro was pretty cool, because he set up the drone and everything, and it's like, alright, so this is what's happening, this is where the people are. So I thought that was a cool little addition that he had to the actual combat. And of course, this Agent Orange, he sends everyone to go after Gunner, and then of course Frank ends up like taking out the dude who stepped on the trip, and like the spikes came up and hit him in the chest, and he sees his face on the little camera, and he's like, oh crap, like that's just another loose end that I need to tie up now, because he knew Gunner was an issue. And I guess Gunner was the only issue. Like, maybe he just realized, like, oh, maybe it was Gunner that did the tape. I don't know, because he was rewinding it, and he kept listening to him say Gunner's name, and I'm like, well, what? Like, I don't get what triggered him to suddenly be like, oh, Gunner's a loose end. Like, and I guess it was just the fact that he knew he was the guy who was kind of like fairly religious and stuff like that. So I don't know, maybe that's why, because there was really no explanation as to exactly why this was when he suddenly decided, oh, Gunner. I don't know, maybe he didn't, I mean, considering how little he cared, he probably didn't actually know their names. I would not be surprised if he legitimately only knew, like, the captain's name, and he didn't know Frank's or Russo's or anybody else. If that comes up in a future episode, I honestly would not be surprised. I'd be like, oh, that actually makes a lot of sense. Like, that's how little they mattered to him. He didn't really know their names, and then it's like, okay, let me just start kind of looking people up, because Gunner was probably the only one that he didn't have tabs on as well. And it was like, oh, that's the guy. Like, maybe that's why it happened, because that was the one name that he didn't find super familiar, because everyone else is like, oh yeah, I'm here, I'm doing this job, or I own this company. And then Gunner was just like off the grid, and then it's like, oh, I haven't heard that name in years. maybe I need to take this dude out because he's off the grid, so I need to find him and make sure he stays off the grid forever. Because typically when someone stays off the grid, that probably means they're hiding a decent enough secret. So maybe that's why it is. Like I said, they don't really explain it, so I'm kind of just filling in blanks for myself, trying to figure out why now he suddenly had interest in Gunner. So I'm going with all sorts of theories as to why this was the moment he decided to attack. But of course, he finds out that Frank is alive, so that freaks him out as well. So that's just another skeleton in his closet. But like I said, the action sequence I thought was pretty good. Frank and Gunner were just continuing to survive. You know, it was like a shootout, and then when they're hiding behind the tree and they have to take the two people out that come around them. The part where Frank, I think, was the very last person, and Frank was like in the leaves, and he just like comes out and he like just stabs the dude. I was like, that was actually kind of cool. So all of that was pretty awesome. And then unfortunately, they're both about to die, and I'm gonna assume that Gunner is dead because he was left there for sure. And then Micro actually does end up saving Frank, and he gets him in the truck and the IV and everything. So you know, that's how that episode ends. But I'm like, yeah, it's unfortunate. I'm quite certain that Gunner is definitely dead, because Frank would have died too if Micro wasn't there to rescue him. So I'm sure Gunner's dead without a doubt. But it was definitely a great action sequence, alongside them going through the crazy firefight that they were going through. We also have you know, Micro's family, and they're getting closer to Frank, and you know, he was helping him out. I think it was in the last episode he was helping him out with the sink, and then in this episode he's replacing the light and stuff after, you know, signing everything. And it's like, okay, well, you know, we kind of want you to come to dinner. Like, his daughter, Michael's daughter, likes Frank for sure, and it's like she was kind of pushing it, where it was like, you know, we should invite him to dinner, and you know, it's the least we can do and stuff. And it's because she likes Frank, and I think it's because she wants like another adult guy in the house, and he's been kind of cool to them. So you know, like, they showed how disappointed that she was that he didn't show up, and I thought that was interesting, because I was wondering if it was going to go that route where, you know, things would happen where the family would end up getting attached to Frank because he's helping them out. And I didn't know if they would do it kind of the generic way, where it was just like, okay, well, of course you have this woman who hasn't, you know, she's been dealing with the loss of her husband, but also she has two kids. She's not trying to go out and, you know, be with somebody, but this random dude comes along who happens to get hit by her car, and then it's just like, oh, he's a nice dude and he's helping us out around the house at random when he certainly doesn't need to. And you know, that could totally make you like somebody, because that's a cool thing to do. After I just hit you with my car, you're helping us out. So I thought it might go that route where she would end up getting feelings for him, but it seems more like the daughter, definitely not the son, but certainly the daughter is like, you know, it's cool to have someone who can help out, because the daughter definitely is taking charge as, you know, the second adult in the household. And it's like, oh, this dude comes along, he can do that, and I can actually live as a kid. And it seemed like that was kind of, all of that was in that look that she had at the end of the episode, where it was like she really wanted Frank to be there, as their dinner guest, you know, for that night. So I thought that was a nice little scene, and I'm curious how that's going to play out, because, you know, that's not what Frank wants. Like, he's having a decent time with them because it has to be therapeutic for him to have some sort of semblance of a family around him. Like, he's literally in the position that he lost. You know, like, he was the father to both a boy and a girl, the boy being the younger, and then, of course, a wife. So he was the one who lost that exact setup with his family, and then he's going into a family that lost the father figure. So it's like that perfect match, but it can't be that perfect because, you know, Micro still wants to go back to his family. So it'll be interesting to see how that plays out, and I am curious if that's going to get revealed to them that Frank knows Micro is alive. So I'm looking forward to how that's going to kind of play out, if they even get to that in the next episode. I don't know. Like, Frank is actually wounded, so they might not get to that in the very next episode. I don't think he'll be going right to them like, hey, I was shot, sorry I didn't make it to dinner. He's pretty wounded, so that might not show up until the episode after next, but I'm definitely looking forward to how that's going to play out, because I feel like it will have an impact on them, and especially with the revelation that Frank is alive, that could lead to some stuff where the family is in danger again, because it could just be like, oh, okay, well, let's see where Frank Castle is. They could do, you know, the gate recognition just like Micro did. You know, it's the CIA. I'm sure they have that. So I feel like that could put the family in danger a second time, you know, with Frank. So I am looking forward to how all of that stuff is going to kind of come together, not just the family and how, you know, they see Frank, but also how they might be in danger all over again, because it's known now that Frank is actually alive. So all in all, definitely a fun episode. Of course, we'd love to know what you guys thought about it, so please comment below. Let me know your favorite parts, your least favorite parts. And, you know, Frank is wounded in the episode, so I would assume the next one is just going to be him recovering. But I would love to know how you guys think things are gonna start kicking up now, because the agent knows that he's alive. I think that is like the catalyst. That's gonna change everything from here on out, and it's just gonna be real, real bad. Like, I think that is what's gonna lead to the family being in danger. I think that's gonna lead to, probably them looking into whether or not Micro is actually dead. I feel like that might be how that plays out, because it's like, okay, well, they don't know that Micro was there. They never saw anything on him, but I don't know. I feel like they might be looking into some of that stuff. And of course, if they have any random footage of Frank with the family, then, excuse me, that would lead, right back to Micro. And it's like, oh, both of these guys are alive. We have a lot of work to do. So I feel like that's where it's headed. Also, this is super random, but they were talking about The Life of Pi, the book. That's what Micro was reading, The Life of Pi. Great book. And I'm curious why that came up. Based on what I know from the story, it was like, they're talking about like what is real and what's not. At the end of the book, I was like, that could definitely apply. Like, what is the truth and what's not the truth? It applies in a very different way compared to Life is Pi. But I was like, oh, that's very interesting. Like, that, there are definitely some parallels in there where it's like, what is the truth that Frank and Micro are looking for versus what's real? Like, what does the world know versus, what's the truth behind everything that's really happened in the world? So I thought that was a cool little parallel, and that was pretty much the parallel, like what's real and what's not, for anyone who may have been wondering like why they were making those connections with the book. Also, Life of Pi is just a great book. It's the only book I've ever read twice. I actually really like that book. I just wanted to put that out there because it's not just that I like the book, it happens to be, but I think there are some legitimate parallels between these two stories as far as, what is real and then kind of what is made up to help people kind of get past. So that's like almost the crux of this thing where it's like, all right, well, this is the truth that Frank Castle and Micro are dealing with versus here's the lie that's being made up by the agent and the other, the dirty cop that Frank killed a few episodes back, and whoever else, is still alive, that knows the truth. So, it was a pretty interesting little parallel, and in general, this is definitely a fun episode, and I can't wait to see how things play out. I know based on the little image for the next episode, we're going back to the one guy who got dropped by Russo, because he was too far gone, the former guy, the guy who was formerly in the military. So he's going to be with the NRA guy, and like I mentioned, I know that there's no way that whatever he's doing is going to work for him, so I feel like we're going to get some interesting little side story disaster in the next episode. It might involve Karen, because that seems like it would just be a story for her. So I don't know, that could be the case, might not be, but I know he's a part of one of the stories in the next episode. So I'm kind of looking for some disaster, because it's just not going to work with him. Something's going to go wrong and he's going to kill some innocent people. Like, I just feel like that's inevitable with his character. I could totally be wrong and somehow he magically gets the help, but I feel like it's just heading towards disaster. So I am kind of looking forward to seeing what happens in this next episode with him. But as far as this one, like I said, we'd love to know what you guys thought about this, and just in general kind of where everything's going with Frank as far as him being knocked out, and what is going to happen, like what's going to happen now that Agent Orange knows that he's alive. I would love to know your theories on how that's going to kind of change things up. And like I said, want to know what you guys thought about the episode in general, so please comment below, let me know, and thanks for watching.